So the reason that I think the IAB is correctly calling AI scraping an existential threat to publishers is because it is routinized theft. What I mean by that is right now, all of these major platforms that we have come to be dependent on, I'm particularly partial to Perplexity over ChatGPT, for example, they are literally stealing original IP, blending it in their platform and presenting it as an answer, occasionally with attribution, but very rarely with monetization. And so what we're now facing in terms of an existential threat is the sustainability of the information economy itself. And what I mean by that is if all of the original content publishers are not able to get fair value for the content, and the content gets scraped the same way the Lorax cuts down all the trees in Dr. Seuss, then the forest dies, there's no more fuel for the AI scrapers, and the consumer who is reliant on that free access to information is left relying on their cousins, brothers, sisters, nephew, and TikTok as a result. And we all know what happens to quality information in that scenario.
So I don't think it's a mischaracterization to say you've been a long advocate of the open web. What does this battle mean to that fight and to the preservation of the open web?
Well, I think it's important because it brings the issue into specific relief. And we have analogies throughout history. The most recent one even predates me, however, and that was when the music industry was losing out in the 40s and 50s to sampling, and then again in the YouTube era where people were scoring content, creators were scoring content in the early 2000s and not giving fair value to music publishers, music writers, et cetera. And whole companies like Zephyr got their start with that. Rich and Zach, if you know the history of Zephyr, they were actually working with the studios and with the music companies to actually get fair value for their content. So over time, we know that this issue will be addressed. But the problem is we're running out of time for ad-supported publishers and platforms already. We're seeing challenges from every direction. Let's just say, without getting political, that there's a war on truth in this country today, and the calls coming from inside the House. The House color might be white. I'm not saying it is. So you've got that challenge. Then you've got the fact that people are not reading as much news content as we would like as they had in the past, or they're used to getting access to it without having to look at ads, or even on the high end, we see people who are able to avoid ads or skip ads through subscription models, and there's nothing wrong with those. But at the end of the day, what we're really solving for is free and fair access to journalism. Because a lot of people who live outside of the New York, DC filter bubble that we get to play in cannot afford umpteen subscriptions to content. And so they rely on the fundamental value exchange that has powered our industry since the dawn of time, which we exchange attention to messaging for access to quality content. That dynamic must hold. And I applaud David Cohen and I applaud the IAB for taking this issue up in Washington, D.C. And I really hope that Congress, regardless of political affiliation, recognizes that this is a fundamental component of our society. The fourth estate, journalism in particular, is the only industry called out in the entire Constitution of the United States because of its unique role in supporting our democracy and, frankly, in our society, right? So there is a war on truth. Journalists are the knights of truth. Publishers and platforms are really the people who are the armorers of those knights, whether they're in the sports business, the entertainment business, the lifestyle business, or above all, the news business. We need to make sure they're getting paid fair value for the content that they're producing and giving to the world to make the world a better place and give us a common frame of reference.
Lou, I also always think of you as a pessimistic optimist or an optimistic pessimist. So working out that tension, do you think we're heading toward a licensed content economy instead of a free access one?
I think we're heading to an economy very similar to what the dynamic is in the creator economy today. If you ask creators today, or if you ask people who are in the creator management space, Neil Waller at Whaler House, Johnny Forster at the Penthouse, they will tell you the same thing. There's no silver bullet to how creators can actually make a sustainable income. They have to have a podcast. They have to have original content deals with publishers. They have to have patrons, if you think of it, like big brands that are paying them so that they can sustain their audience. And so I think we're looking at a model today which has subscription, which has ad support, which has licensing. And we've seen a few instances where licensing deals have been struck. The New York Times famously did a deal with Amazon to license some of its content. But are they getting fair value? What is fair value over time? I don't know. I think we need to start experimenting there. But Google announced at IAB that they had done 3 new content licensing deals, and yet they're scraping 100% of tens of thousands of publishers. What about the other 99.99%, right? We need to do this urgently, and we need to do it with a collaborative and experimental mindset with the goal of preserving the sustainability of the information economy.
So does that imply that LLMs should be required to pay for publisher content? And should that be regulatorily? Should it be industry standard wise, or should it be morally? Or
fortunately, the answer to your question was written long ago. And that answer is legally, they must pay for that content. It is intellectual property. It is covered by a raft of federal and state statutes in most states. And you can't just selectively say, oh, new technology over here, let's throw all those old rules out in order to enable the technology. And unfortunately, the complexity of it, the sort of go fever, if you know that line from NASA in the 1960s where let's get a man on the moon, right? We all want AI to be successful. It is a uniquely American thing that will actually solidify our position globally. We have the engineering base, we have the financial resources, we have Silicon Valley, billionaires and entrepreneurs that are funding it, but we can't ignore the law in the pursuit of the next thing. So what we need is enforcement. And what we need to deal with, frankly, if we go back about a decade when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in front of Congress and one of the senators asked him, well, how does Facebook make money? And he sort of deadpanned to the camera and he said, Senator, we sell ads. Like, oh, eureka. It's that scene in Trading Places. Bacon, like you might find in a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, right? So we need to recognize that Congress needs education about the implications of not enforcing law. And again, Congress doesn't enforce the laws, they make the laws, but they need to clarify that this law, the laws on the books already concerning intellectual property, need to be enforced. The executive branch needs to recognize that's a priority, and we need case law, we need precedent, and we need people recognizing that the long-term shared interest of all of us, buy side, sell side, tech side, and the Silicon Valley community is entirely about ensuring that that content gets fair value so the engine will continue to run.
So with that question settled, could mandated compensation create a new revenue stream for news and premium content, or will only the largest publishers benefit, or is this across the board?
I think that all high-quality content producers, whether national or local, will benefit from something. Remember, local news is the most trusted and actually, in many respects, the most vital form of news. For example, I want to see what time my kid's softball game is. I want to see what the weather is today so I can figure out how to dress. I want to know when the school board is meeting so I can go and make sure they don't ban Huck Finn and other really, subversive books, right? That is something that local news uniquely gives us. If it's editorially respected, if it's, there are some people who are gathering up these local publishing sites now who have a political bias, and unfortunately they're shaping the content, and that does not bode well. But right now, local news can compete. I think we need to see more consortia that are actually representing them. I think of NewsPass ID and the work that Scott Cunningham is doing to bring, I think he's got 5,000 local news publishers who are working together to ensure that their voices are heard. I think we need something in Washington, D.C. that recognizes that the balance of the ecosystem can't just be the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, if that's still around in 5 minutes. It needs to be a blend and a balance of all different news sources, and frankly, all different ad-supported sources too. It's not just news, but I think news is the most crucial and right now, and sadly, the most vulnerable of all the ad-supported platforms.
So turning from the sell side of the equation to the buy side, for advertisers and agencies, Lou, what are the implications if AI platforms face higher content costs or restricted data access?
Well, I think it'll be interesting because if the platforms figure out their relationship with advertising, and we saw during the Super Bowl this year, some platforms, actually saying we're open for business for advertising, and others say we will never take advertising, right? And so the marketplace has not settled. I remember when Netflix said they would never take advertising, and 3 of my very good friends in succession have been the heads of and then the former heads of ad sales there. So never is a very long time in our industry. And if all the attention goes to LLMs, I recently had to do a very big project over the weekend for one of my biggest clients. And as you know, I am work averse. I don't like having to actually work. I like getting paid for my opinion, not actual work. But I had to do a lot of primary research. I spent the weekend with Perplexity, and it was amazing. I asked it to do things for me. It gave me a synthesis and distillation of the marketplace. I literally dropped it into the work that I was doing for my client, and lo and behold, the work was not only well received, but incredibly effective in our goal. So the world's attention is shifting to these easy buttons, just as we've seen advertiser attention shifting to easy buttons like walled gardens and opaque buying systems and now opaque measurement systems like Meridian. Let me grade my own homework. So eventually advertisers will go there. And eventually those platforms will need to take advertising revenue because they cannot sustain the growth. And frankly, the revenue models are very tenuous right now. They've taken on trillions of dollars of debt and they only have millions of dollars of revenue runway. So the marketplace will resettle. And I think what we will come back to is a dynamic that I believe is true today, that I believe will be true soon, and I hope is true today in certain circumstances. Advertisers will do significantly more business with significantly fewer outlets that really represent their values, that provide them high quality data, high quality environments to run their ads, and maybe even help make their ads more relevant to the content. So instead of an ad that sits in stark contrast to the user experience, it's actually highly relevant to the user experience. Hey, if you like the editorial content over there, we might have something for you. I didn't pioneer it. I did this when I was at Bank of America with the World Economic Forum. We were creating content knowing that Christine Lagarde was going to talk about something so that when she did, and it ran on Bloomberg, we actually had right rail content that matched it. It's a very doable thing. It's more costly, but you get what you pay for. And if I get premium quality engagement because I'm doing a premium contextual match, advertisers will stop worrying about CPM and they will start looking at real metrics like customer acquisition cost to really be able to talk to their CFO and say, guess what? For every dollar you give me, I'm actually giving you $1.32 in growth, and no other part of the enterprise is giving you that level of return. And stop apologizing for advertising and start asserting ourselves that it's creating value. CPM is a race to the bottom. Customer engagement is a race to the top. Customers are going to engage with these platforms.